of all, thank you guys for being here and being prepared to share the wisdom of your career with the huge and curious crowd. And special thanks to Shannon, who's officially joining the earliest in the history of Dev Talks. What time is it where you are?
We just passed 7 a.m.
Yeah, that's a sacrifice, but appreciate it even more. Guys, I think, just as an introduction, I think, both of you had, I think, very interesting careers. So maybe if you could just do like a 1 minute intro of, how you got into engineering and, what led you to these, leadership roles in really cool tech companies. I think it would be a great, great start and setting the stage for people to actually know where your experience is coming from. Why don't you start, Shannon?
Yeah, great. Thanks for having us. Glad to be here. I don't know if it's an honor or privilege or maybe something we should be concerned about that we were invited to talk about failures, but glad to be here either way. I joined Onna having a background in other startups and small companies, but then also in enterprise companies. I say I kind of grew up in a large company. It was a 14,000 person private company, one of the larger private software companies in the world, doing analytics. Kind of grew up starting in university, thinking about doing hardware, looking at computer engineering, but then fell in love with programming after my first course and wanted to solve problems. So working in the large company, had a chance to dabble in different things, did some work in QA automation, did some work in tools development, and then moved toward leadership because I realized I like people more than I like software. And so the software skills, started trying to develop more of those around leadership. But then really found a passion for helping people. So helping people outside of work, but also helping people like in work, finding where their passions and their talents like align with what companies need. Because I had found that, and I feel like it just makes for a job that doesn't feel like much work. When I left the large company, I had done probably 3 or 4 different projects there. Jumped into tech for older adults, which is an interesting space because you have to have considerations about usability and things that are different than the common market. But we were doing IoT in conjunction with cloud software as well. And so a lot of diverse kind of problems to solve there. And here at Onna, we're doing an integrated knowledge system where we're finding insights inside of all the disparate data that's across all the different tools that we use every day across collaboration, content, and communication. So lots of problems to solve there as well.
Yeah, sounds like an impressive range of experience you had, and I think you'll definitely have some unique experience on, how failure is different in a startup versus how failure is considered in a 14,000 people organization.
For sure.
But before we get into that, Tobias, you're also in had a pretty cool career behind you, and Gaia is a really interesting business combining kind of like software and real world problems. So it would be great to get a bit of background about yourself as well.
Yeah, as I said, I don't think I have that much breadth in my background because I tend to join early stage startups pretty much from the get-go and grow with them for some amount of time until I feel like I want to go early stage again. I have done that a few times in my career. I think I will continue doing that until I run out of ideas or startups to go to. So yeah, I'm probably more like an early stage than like a growth stage engineer, I guess. My background is in the engineering side, but I've also done my fair share of a bit of design, product management. I'm probably more an entrepreneur than anything else these days. I guess what pushed me on the leadership side is just having done it for a few times and being part of growing businesses. You always have the opportunity to take on the lead on like either projects or potentially people as well. And I've started that like a few years back and somehow like gradually moved more into a leadership role while being less and less hands-on and generally helping others to do what I used to enjoy, which is building product and helping people with technology.
Cool. Shannon, I think, very often when we talk about, failure and fuck ups, it's something that I consider a very much a natural part of being in an early stage company.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in essence, you're trying to solve a problem that is either not solved or has been solved in different ways, and you have a lot of hypotheses, and by definition, you're often wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many things that can go wrong. The users won't be interested in the solution that you created. The tech will not work as you predicted it will. Things will take longer than expected. Things will break, etc. How is it different when you're part of a 14,000 people organization, which is super established, have loads of clients? It's maybe not that innovative, and it's maybe not that iterative on a daily basis, versus the startup world. Because I think, these sound like completely two different worlds, and it'd be interesting to hear, how it looks from your perspective.
Yeah, the engineering realm, right, is all about problem solving. And someone said, I don't know who it was, that if you're not failing, you're not trying, right? So like we have to try to solve problems. And, if you're getting it right every time, you're either the smartest person ever to walk the planet, or like you're solving simple problems. And oftentimes simple problems aren't the ones that are making a difference that people want to pay for. But you're right. Inside of the large company, it's harder to find sort of a breadth of opportunity for solving, big problems. Because as you get bigger, your roles often get smaller, and so you have more people, so you become more specialized. I do think there's opportunity, though, and this is what my experience was late in my time with the larger company, to find sort of new technologies or new paths that that big company is maybe established in one area, but needs to move in a new area. So like showing my age a little bit, like I was at a big company moving from, on-prem and in data centers into the cloud, right? So like as that transition happens, there's lots of opportunities that had opened up. I think there's also opportunities as new technologies. I think about the many different eras of front-end development that have happened over my career, and the new technology that becomes in vogue. So getting the chance to kind of grab hold of something, do some prototyping and test it out is available, but often you have to jump through a lot of hoops in a big company because they have an established way, they have an investment in a certain technology, and so you don't have that freedom as much to kind of learn and innovate on the fly. Something that I feel like, Tobias, I'm with you on joining an earlier stage and kind of growing up with it. Like that's a lot more fun for me than being in the big established company. But coming out of university, it was a good chance to learn a lot from a lot of people that had some experience, that now I can sort of try to bring the best of that into a smaller company setting while leaving some of the bureaucracy in the big company.
Cool. Yeah. Tobias, like your perspective is slightly different. So, you probably have been in a number of early stage companies trying to do something new. Like, what would you say is the sort of like a kind of like a good culture, good approach to failure versus bad approach to failure?
I mean, especially in the earlier stages, the risk is generally a little bit higher. Like if you fail hard in the earlier stages, that can potentially kill the business. And I don't think that you have that in later stages. But so you want to build a culture where everyone is somewhat incentivized to make mistakes, but also build a safety net around everyone to feel supported and to not be able to actually F up that much that you can actually put the business at risk. And it's a thin line, to be honest, because there is not much safety net, and like a lot of, especially on the engineering side, you have access to, I don't know, potentially production in one way or another. You can like bring down systems, you can make mistakes because generally, like in the seed stage at least, you haven't built up the safety nets. so finding the balance between those two things is probably the most challenging aspects of that.
Yeah, I would piggyback off of that, Tobias. I think establishing that culture is important, because if people see failure as bad, like, they're going to be less likely to try something new, or even, and it trickles down from there. They won't even push the idea out because they're like, well, that idea is not guaranteed to work. And in our world, like, there's no guarantees, right? Like, we have to be willing to innovate and think differently and at least pose ideas. And so I think it's creating a culture of failure is not an end state, though, as you said, it can be a huge failure. It can, but those aren't the failures that you're going to see more often. It's a cheaper failure, and creating that culture of how do you do it in a way that you can test without it being so expensive time-wise or financially.
Yeah, just generally reflect on the outcomes of that. And like, I mean, you start with the basic, like, have a no blame culture. Like, you if failures happen, you just come together as a team and talk it through. Like, how can we prevent this from happening again? Not only on the technical side, also on like the business user experience, whatever side. You generally have to do that from the get-go, so everyone feels like they can share their actual thoughts about, especially things that did not work out, and you want to celebrate it to some extent as well.
Yeah. How did, like, you've mentioned a couple, I think, interesting points that are a lot around, culture, attitude of the organization, also to some degree a process. So I wanted to ask you a couple of questions, about your organizations, but also feel free to refer to your previous experiences. Like, one important challenge is, that we as an early stage company have, but also, a lot of other businesses, is like, on one hand, you want people to have initiative and ideas. On the other hand, as an early stage company, you have to be ruthlessly focused. How are you balancing these two? It's kind of like, on one hand, you're telling everyone, okay, guys, come up with ideas, we need to think big, etc. And at the end of the day, it's okay. It's great that we got 32 ideas, but we're going to do 2 of them. How do you balance that?
Yeah, I think you're right. You focus is important because it helps people to know kind of where we're going. I think it's the idea of creating guardrails of like, this is the direction that we're headed, and within this direction, now you have some freedom to experiment. I think ownership is also a key and sort of important thing here, like ownership of like the problem solving, but also on the other end of it, like deciding to do this thing, you need to understand how it impacts all the other things. And so like you own it, but like you also own the responsibility of making sure that it is pushing us toward that direction inside of those guardrails. And I try to pass down ownership to other leaders within the team and other developers within the teams. Even some of my managers are giving junior developers responsible for epics and saying like, you're leading this here, because it's creating that sense of like ownership, even at an early stage of, the project size and scope is different depending on the engineer, but like, it's yours, you're leading this. How are we going to get there? And I feel like we want people to experiment and try with an eye for the future of where we're actually trying to head. We're not over here somewhere, but at least it's headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I would definitely agree to that. It might be a bit controversial, but from my experience, if you find yourself in a position where you get a lot of ideas that you will not be able to do because they're not aligned with your current vision or focus, you probably have not communicated the focus enough, or like you have not given enough context from the high level, because that means that people are just going off and like they're coming up with ideas that are not relevant at this particular moment in time. So it is really important to set like the high level objectives, focus enough instead of like being like very fluffy and leaving too much room to.
These were great answers, by the way. I think the problem, I was focusing on is not when you have really good ideas that are fit, but then you, together with commercial team, founders, etc., you have to make a judgment call with a limited information. Okay, thanks for all the ideas. We're gonna do these 2 first, and then we'll see. Because that's, I think, something where obviously, like in the examples you've mentioned, yes, this is clearly if the ideas are, spread it around. It's probably lack of clear vision. But the other big problem in early stage companies is also sequencing.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of good ideas for features, improvements, etc., but you have very limited sort of engineering firepower. How do you deal with that so you don't end up kind of like discouraging people?
So two things that come to mind is one, creating a system where most people on the team understand that direction, and so it becomes self-healing. So if Tobias throws in an idea that doesn't merge, it's not me from the top down saying, Tobias, sorry, we can't do your idea. It's the rest of the team is like, hey, I don't know if that actually helps here. Cool idea. Would love to play with that on the side, but like, I don't think that it helps here. And so making sure everyone kind of knows what that North Star is helps it be not like the leader is saying no, but more like the team is all knows where we're going and we are trying to get there. And so we can decide if it's not going to, be a part of how we get to where we want to get to. I think it's also, Onna's building a platform. In my last company, we were also building a platform. And what I mean by that is like, we're building building blocks that like come together that we can do more and more things, right? So as we are taking in ideas, we can filter it through. Like, is this a thing that we can build now that's going to help us build the next thing and build the next thing and build the next thing? Whether it's microservices or micro front ends or just some sort of capability, like we can take in some ideas that aren't today the most critical thing, but it's like an enabler for the future thing. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility to take in ideas that are not like the most critical, but are sort of a multiplier.
Yeah, taking people with you while making these decisions is also important, and not like shutting things down, but like explaining why that is and why you picked the other idea over this, and generally like being empathetic about it as well, like understanding that someone feels very strongly about it, and instead of just shutting it down, like trying to understand where they're coming from, and maybe getting them excited about the other thing that you will actually work on, so they lose that focus a little bit, and they can pick it up in a quarter potentially.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to mind is in a previous company, we were very focused on capturing intellectual property, patents, and being able to like sort of capture ideas. So we would have sessions where we would just ideate and we would come up with ideas. And the CEO had previous success through having captured a lot of IP for his previous company, which led to a fairly sizable acquisition. And so he wanted this. And so it gave people that opportunity to have ideas and get celebrated for the ideas, even if we weren't building that right then. And so we captured many patents while I was there, and rewarded people for that. Like they got recognized for it. And so it wasn't just about the building, but sometimes it was about just the ideation and creating that culture of thinking differently.
Yeah. Question that is slightly connected with that, and also something you, Shannon, mentioned earlier. How difficult it is for you to instill a culture where people think bold enough, right? Where people are not afraid of their doing something that might not work. Like, what do you feel are the necessary ingredients to create an environment where this sort of bold thinking, not being afraid of failure, doing something original is possible?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's not easy, especially if another idea gets planted first. So Onna, we are in Series B. I jokingly say we're spending other people's money. Thank you, Atomico. But we are building out something for the future, and we have established customers. And so now it's this tension between the future we want to build toward, plus maintaining the customer base that we've gained. And you can get caught up in, well, this customer wants this thing, or we need to do this new feature because it's going to gain this new market share. And you had to balance between product and engineering and sales and go to market. And so if it's driven too much by sort of the demands of the day, it becomes difficult for people to think about, oh, well, I want to experiment with this. So somehow we have to create margin there. So we do some things like we had a hackathon not long ago. At my previous company, we had quarterly hackathons. It gave space that was dedicated to just trying. And, we have some teams that are looking at like picking a day a month and saying, this is what we're going to be doing, where we're just trying to try something new, just to stimulate those bigger ideas, the things that, maybe aren't on the roadmap, but could be, great things for us to do moving forward.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Tobias.
I think, yeah, go ahead.
How are you dealing with it?
I think for me, it starts early. It starts in the hiring funnel. Like we are actively looking for people who think big, and we're testing for it, and we're looking for people who are really into what we're trying to achieve as a business, versus just, especially on the engineering side, I'm more excited about certain technologies that we want to use. And we are actively testing for that as part of the hiring. And as soon as you bring these people in, they will create the culture that enables this thinking big. And that's my advice.
Yeah, I have a great friend who gave me an interview question that he uses, and he asks, explain to me the most innovative thing you've brought to your company, this company, last company. And, he's like, what problem did you see where you said this needs to be done differently, and brought in these ideas? And, he's a brilliant guy. And if it's not super innovative, we'll tell them like, hey, well, that's kind of status quo here. Is there anything else that you've thought of that's like broader than that you haven't been able to bring into your company yet? Because he's looking for that person that is like seeing problems and seeing like, future solutions.
Yeah.
Another thing that I in the interview process, I tell people I want humble experts. Like I want to bring in people that are excellent at what they do, that have the humility that they can show up and take a little bit of time to understand where Onna is today. But the thin line there is I don't want them to accept this is where Onna is today, as in this is where Onna has to be. So I say I don't want you to accept the status quo, but you also can't come in and kick the door down and be a jerk about it. But like you should question things like, help me understand why we're doing it this way. Have we ever thought about doing this other way? Like I've seen this, I've done this. I can bring this, that expertise, but in sort of this sense of humility.
Yeah, I think this is like, super important, but also like a very hard balance.
Mm-hmm.
Like you very often have kind of like a correlation between people who are kind of like great salespeople, how eager they are to take, share of voice in a room. And what I want to dig into a little bit is how these dynamics, how you make sure to create an inclusive environment in a remote setup, which I think is very different from, how things used to be run. And it creates maybe, at least from my perspective, it's actually better environment for people who are maybe this sort of, humble individuals who are slightly better with like a written form of communication, etc. But I'm quite curious to hear, how you're dealing with it. And I was particularly interested about, Tobias, your experience, because in your previous company, you've spent 5 years as a CTO. So you've been there in the good old days where I imagine everyone was in the office, etc. And then you led a transition, and now you've joined to a completely, different business where you probably had to implement some things from scratch based on your learnings. So I'm quite keen to hear how you have been balancing it, and what has been your journey, sort of, identifying what's the best practice nowadays.
I mean, one thing I have to mention there is Gaia is not a fully remote company. We have an office, and the majority of the team actually comes in. And that was one of the reasons why I joined the company as well. I was previously fully remote, and I generally enjoy the hybrid way of working to avoid most of the challenges that you're describing. So maybe this is actually my personal failure, because I've never actually been able to solve this problem in a remote setting. And it is easier to solve this problem in in-person environment, even if it's not like every day sitting in an office. So I'm sorry that I can give you any.
It's even like usually like this is also, very much on the subject of, failures.
Mhm.
Like when things fail, we usually learn much more,
For sure.
right? So what do you think was the big challenge for you trying to instill that when you were forced to run things remotely? What were the biggest sort of inefficiencies and problems you observed?
It's just the engagement. Like I found like moving from like working fully remotely for two years into a very like much early stage setting with like, and I think we were like at that point 12 people sitting in a room, and like you can overhear everyone's conversations all the time, including the CEO talking to investors and all these kind of things. Picking up these things is impossible in the remote world, and this is one of the reasons why I think, especially in the earlier stages, it is easier if you are able to work at least to some extent together.
Yeah. What is, Shannon, you're in an organization that is spread across 4 different locations, if I understand correctly. And I don't imagine there's a lot of people around the place where you are based.
Yeah.
So I'm quite keen to listen to your perspective, where obviously, things are set up very, very differently.
So Onna's world headquarters is in Barcelona, and we have we used to have a Barcelona team, and now we have more of a Spain team because 1, people have moved out of the city. 2, we've hired from all over Spain. We also have some team members in France. On the business side, we have people in the UK. In the US, we cover all 4 time zones, and so we have a 9-hour time spread between the two far time zones. But Onna, from the very beginning, has been a remote company, having to deal with remote issues. It's not, we have offices in Barcelona, and here in Raleigh, we actually have an office where we have several people. Pre-pandemic, there was a plan to build up an office here. I joined the company to build up an office here. But now with the way the world works, we just hire from kind of wherever the best people are. And that's caused us to have to deal with more and more, not just remote between 2 offices, but remote between everyone's home. And the thing that I found the most challenging there is, in the past, work was vocation plus community. So you would have the work that you were doing, but also building relationships with the people. So building trust so that when I fail, these people aren't going to throw me under the bus. These people know me. They care about my well-being. But it's hard to build those relationships in the remote setting. I joined Onna in April of 2020, so I'm 2 years in here, but I'm right at the beginning of the pandemic. I joined a brand new company, knew no one. I had interviewed all remote except for with the technical co-founder, and it was difficult to establish those relationships. And so me being who I am, like I would schedule time with people. I would stop meetings earlier to have chats, but it's difficult for a new engineer to walk in and feel that connection. And so we have teams who are trying their best to find these ways, these connection points. And we do have some budget we allocate toward people getting together. We have our DevOps team came together in Spain. We have a team coming together in New York, but being so spread out, that gets costly. And so we can't do it every day. So some teams have, a Discord channel where it's just open and you can kind of overhear some of those conversations that Tobias was talking about. But it is hard. It's difficult to like overcome that, the time between the meetings, when I'm walking there, when I'm getting coffee, like all those conversations are just hard to replicate in a remote world.
How did it influence, and this is a question for both of you, like how this sort of remote or semi-remote setup, how did it influence the things you're looking for in a great engineer in an interview process?
Yeah, I think this working in a remote world gives you more time for focus, right? Like Tobias talked about being in the office and overhearing. I remember in my last company, like that was a blessing and a curse, right? Because you're sitting next to the support team and they're like leaning over and saying, "Hey, how do we fix this thing?" Like where now, like you can lock in, right? Like you can shut down Slack, you can not check email, you can lock in and do things, but you have to be sort of mature and take on that responsibility for yourself. And so asking questions during the interview about like, what are your practices? How do you kind of address, this working from home thing, because everyone's got a life, right? I have 3 kids, and so like I'm outside because inside everyone's getting ready for school, and so like how do you balance? And a lot of people are struggling with that, and so how do you talking with a more senior engineer and saying like they probably have a little more life behind them, and so they probably might have a family around too. How are you trying to make sure that you're productive? Like, how much do you need in person? Like I love it too, Tobias. I love getting together with people, the energy that comes out of like being collaborative, standing by a whiteboard. But like when you don't have that, like, are you able to be productive? And so just having an open conversation about like how you thrive and how you struggle, like it's human, right? And this is just the reality that we're all living in. So I think having those conversations early, can help you understand, is this person thriving at home or really kind of unable to be super productive at home?
Yeah, I mean, I also have to add, working in an office for 3 days a week, that's what I'm doing right now. On the engineering side, I don't think anyone gets any work done when they're there, and the majority of the work actually happens at home, and we usually come in for like planning, for social events, but overall, it's the challenges are still there, especially going back from a remote world. What previously actually is just that you'd have to test for great communication skills, especially with communication. A lot of things happen async in a remote world, especially if you work over multiple time zones, and you just have to make sure that is a given.
How do you test for communication skills in the sort of this new age, right? What are your sort of like the best way to get it? Because it's something that it's very connected to like personality to some extent, but I think that that's a very shallow way to look at it, because I've met many great engineers who are introverts, who are amazing communicators. Like they are super precise, and you look at the document and everything is clear, and you don't need to have any call, etc., because it's clear, and when they ask questions, they're always to the point, and you know exactly why they need it, etc. How do you test for it in this slightly changed environment? Because I think quite a lot of failures are actually started from like just bad communications.
For sure.
What
are you thinking?
I don't think I have the magic answer, especially around the written communication. It is challenging. I think you can. Every interview process is a conversation, and if you get very short answers to like quite open questions as part of an interview, that might be a challenge. But I don't think I have found the magic trick to be 100% certain that communication is as expected.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's another one of those difficult things, but everything's a clue, right? So even the email communication, like what is that like? So our interview process includes a conversation with someone like me or a manager, which is more high level, like just understanding where the person's been, where they want to go. Does that align with kind of where Onna's trying to go? So you get sort of the conversational there, but then we get deeper into technical. We do like I say a whiteboard, but it's not like go do a bubble sort on a board. It's more like, hey, like we're trying to design a system. Like, let's talk about this. So just can they hold that sort of conversation about architecture or a system in a technical setting? Because everyone has their strengths. Like even someone that doesn't want to chit chat, like when you get them onto the topic they love. Like one of my best friends is super introverted. He'll sit all night. We're having drinks. He's not saying much. But then like we get on a topic that he loves, he's in. And so like kind of finding those things that people like are really interested in. You can see how they communicate about technical topics. We also do a bit of an exercise for folks, and what does the README look like? What does the code look like? Like, it's kind of tells you a little bit about how they want to communicate technically. Everyone's putting their best foot forward there, so maybe not every pull request looks like that one, but you can get a little bit of an understanding across all those different kind of pieces to get a feel for this communication. But Tobias, the written part, man, that's so important right now. Like how people kind of get ideas out of their head and written down. I think about the early stage startup too. Like when people come and maybe they're there for the first year or two and they leave, but they've done so much foundational work and then it walks out with them. Like I'm thinking more and more like this year, like write stuff down is a thing that I say over and over. Like, it just because we have to have that like intellectual property not wrapped up in someone's brain, but
Yeah.
It is easier to create the environment where after someone interviewed and joined to enforce that the written communication is there and that there is history of whatever decision has been made. But it's hard to test explicitly for it. I mean, we do it as well. Like our technical test is usually a pairing exercise. So we have a tiny little problem, and you can do whatever you want to do. You can Google, you can Stack Overflow, but like you work with someone from the engineering team, and communication is so important as part of pairing. And if someone is not used to that, you can pick up a lot of hints that might be an issue.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think for us, our engineering team's about 7 people now. The whole company is 13 people. Like, I think getting this ability to write things down makes collaboration when you're completely remote, which is our case, so much easier. Because very often it is, I hear a great idea from someone, whether it's an engineer or a commercial person. It's like, great, but the cost of passing it to someone to actually do something with it is like super, super high. So we're always trying to start with like a super short, several sentences, whether it's like a user story or anything like that. But it just starts, to generate questions, etc. And I feel like this is, like really tangible way of communicating, also asynchronously, so it does not break focus, and you can actually sort of, lead some creative work. But I also think that it's something that's much more like, it's okay with our team, but it's probably difficult to scale. So it's also a question to you guys. Both of your organizations are, either scaling very fast or are already pretty big. Like, how are you, looking at the scaling challenges, when it comes to kind of like, good cooperation, building strong kind of like team bonds. Obviously, retention is a huge process and problem as well. So I'm curious, what are your solutions? What are the big challenges that, you're dealing with now? Because maybe that's not a challenge at all, and something other is a challenge.
No, that's writing things down. One of the challenges we're facing with that is single authorship, where I want collaboration. It's becoming more of, well, Tobias wrote this document, and so like that's Tobias's thing. Where we're using collaboration tools like Confluence or Google Docs and things like that, but like where everyone can edit and share. But we're finding a lot of like these. It's like one person is capturing an idea, and that just becomes the truth. Where what I really want is like that shared ownership, that like everyone like is a part of that problem. Because otherwise, documentation gets stale. And that time you invested, like you said, is takes time to write it down. But if it's not living, like now it's just that time, maybe it's even wasted. How do we know that was actually a valuable thing to spend time on? But it is important because, the world is full of great engineers and every company knows it, right? So all of our companies are fighting for the same people. And it's like, well, this is a cool problem I've been working on for a year, but like, I'm interested in what they're doing. And so like someone walks out the door, if it's not written down, you lose a lot of that. Especially one of my failures in sort of the arc of my career is relying too heavily on one person for a given thing. And then you laugh maybe because it's happened to you too. Like the person walks out the door and now you're like, oh, did anyone else actually understand what we were doing there? And so the scramble to kind of backfill that, that thing. Luckily, we've had some good relationships with folks, and it's like, hey, like, can I pay you to give like a tech talk back at your old company about the thing that you built? Like, but it's writing stuff down or not writing stuff down. Like it's a choice of investment of time, and you're never going to get it right, but probably erring on the side of capturing it is and even if it's rough, like it's probably helpful in the world we live in, where people are moving a lot.
I'm still a little bit in a honeymoon period here, though. My engineering team is 3 people right now, plus myself. So it is a problem I do not have yet, and I'm like enjoying this moment, and I'm dragging it on for like at least in a couple of more months. So I can't really talk about it.
Well, you said you have the office there. Just putting it up on the whiteboard, right? Just like scribbling the note there,
But I think incentivizing the behaviors that you described is really important. Pairing exercises, sharing knowledge, planning together instead of just like giving one task to one person. Like you have to plan it through together, and like everyone in the team knows roughly what to do, and then someone picks it up and works on it. Or like you have two people working together, and like incentivizing that kind of behavior from the get-go is really important. So you don't end up in the situation where like one person has all the knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a question from my dear co-founder and CTO Stanislas. How do you make sure people will own an idea that originates from another person?
Yeah, I don't know if this is talking about like it's already a developed thing and you have to maintain it, or if it's an idea that now needs to be implemented, a solution needs to be created. This goes back to that sort of what's the North Star, like where are we headed and kind of how are we going to get there? Like I think giving someone a solution, saying here's what you need to go do, probably isn't going to work. But helping someone see here's the problem and here's an idea about how to solve that problem could actually be sort of a fast forward on that. It's like, oh, okay, like let me build off of that. I find especially like motivated senior engineers don't want to be handed solutions. They want to be given problems so that now their mind can start to work around what that problem is. And so I would say the way you present it probably helps, create that sense of ownership.
Yeah,
100% that. You have to sell it, first of all, and you have to sell it in a way where you're not talking about the particular idea or solution. You have to sell it thinking about first principle. Like, this is a problem that we have as a business. This is what we're doing right now. Right. Seems to work, but you own the problem. You're not owning the solution. And this might be right or it might be wrong. Figure it out.
On the start of the conversation, we touched upon something that I think is very important for every business. So as much as we all like to think big and disrupt the world and change it, we often have customers and people who rely on the software, and it cannot break. And as you said, we're in early stages that can be fatal for the whole company. Like, what are the sort of like engineering processes that you implement to mitigate that risk?
I mean, we have a staged environment, right? So like we have Kubernetes clusters just for a team, right? So you can break anything you want there because you're just breaking yourself. But then as we roll up toward production, we have more stability is needed, and so that gives a sort of a playground or a place to test ideas, and then also having this sort of stage environment gives us a place where we can be fairly confident that we're not breaking the existing customers. We do some things under feature flag as well, so that when we do go into production, we can see it in production, but not everyone else, and kind of test some grounds there. Those are not rocket science or brand new innovative ideas, but like that, those are some of the processes that we've put in place.
Yeah, trust your tests. Have tests first of all.
Have tests.
Unit test, integration test, end-to-end test, and it should cover all your main journeys. And as long as you can trust that, it gives you a lot of flexibility to like experiment. And if you fail, well, write a test for it.
Yeah, it goes back to ownership also of like, okay, like you can do things, but like if this breaks down, you're responsible for it. So like if the pager duty goes off at night, like it's on you to wake up and do something about it. We have an SRE team, but they're there to kind of keep the peace. But like when it goes into product problems, like we're rolling out sort of an on-call, like, hey, like this is your problem to solve, your solution to provide, but also this is your solution to support. And so how does it, it kind of gives you this incentive to, like Tobias said, make sure your tests are working, make sure that you feel really confident before you disrupt the customer, because it's going to disrupt, your time at home, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, we are still in an environment where like people don't mind doing releases at 7 p.m. on a Friday, and I'm always saying like, okay, do it, but if this kills your weekend, it's not going to be me, it's your weekend. I wonder how long we can run like this. I think we will have. Yes, yeah, exactly. But yeah, that's currently the stage that I'm at the moment.
Yeah. Cool. Well, the last question is always the same. So guys, like, this is time for you to shine. Like, what has been your biggest fuck up as an engineer? And like, you guys are very experienced. I'm sure you can talk about something that was 10 years ago or so, but just to give us a flavor before we part ways. What was it?
Yeah.
Shannon, do you
go? This is also showing my age again. So back at the big company, I was young and given responsibility for validation for this system, and it was Constant Contact or MailChimp or Mandrill, like your sort of your dynamic email content system is what we had built. But it was back in the early 2000s, kind of before all of those things. Well, this included sort of a lot of cool tech because we were doing sort of distributed computing, sending out emails across a grid of email servers. And I had created a loop, like an internal loop where I'm sending and receiving emails, hundreds of thousands, millions of emails back and forth. And then I was going to get married. And I was signing off the day before I was going off. I was taking a couple of days off before the wedding and then taking some time off after the wedding. And I get a phone call. And I've never seen this name before. This is back when people actually called people. And I answer the phone and they're like, hey, we're seeing a lot of email come in, like for something that looks like you. And it was like my username at like a domain that was owned by the company. And I was like, yeah, that shouldn't be happening. Like, and they're like, well, yeah, we've gotten like 400,000 emails for you. and what had happened was I turned off the email servers, and the bounce back was on like my actual email for the company. Like I had done all this work to be precise about my test environment, except for when I shut it down, like all of them started bouncing back and spamming the whole company. And I said it was like 14,000 people. I shut down, like I did a denial of service attack on our email system because I was sending so many emails to the company. And so I learned quickly, like your test environment, like you need to have your I's dotted, your T's crossed, that like you are not like disrupting production. So that was probably my most significant one that stuck with me the longest. Yeah.
Sounds pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
How was the wedding?
Oh, so the thing was, like, I was like scrambling to get that thing done so I could leave, and I needed the wedding. I needed the reception after the wedding with all the cocktails.
Good one. Tobias, what about you?
I don't think I have like on top of my head like this like wartime story, but I think my biggest learning is like don't get overly obsessed with certain technologies because they all come back in a different way. I think at one stage of my career I was very, very much I had the opinion that Backbone.js is the new thing in terms of front-end frameworks, and I spent like month and month convincing other engineers and executives that this is definitely the way to go and implementing it all over the place. Yeah, I don't think it did in the end. And then React came out, and I left the company, and I don't know if they still use it, but I think they had like, I think they wasted quite a bit of engineering time, like getting rid of like that particular idea. And yeah, that was a moment where I realized that technology is, you shouldn't get overly obsessed with like one specific framework, particular technology, because it will hit you.
The world changes, right?
All the time.
Cool. Look, guys, I guess this is it for us. Like, it's been an enormous pleasure to talk to you guys, and a lot of cool insights, and we've covered a lot of ground, and I really enjoyed hearing all the stories. To everyone on the audience, like, the guys are, backed by one of the top VCs in the world, Atomico. They hiring like crazy. So if they charmed you with their amazing personality and knowledge, like, you should definitely reach out and connect. And that's it for us for today.